What would be some tips, Tamara, you would give to some professionals or workers in this field that would help them engaging with young people with a care experience?
Don't call them DCP kids or GOM kids. The amount of times that I've said, no, they're not a GOM kid, a child, or they're a teenager, and they went, I'm just saying what it is, and I'm like, no, you don't realise the impact.
We would like to acknowledge and pay our respects to the Kaurna people, the traditional custodians whose ancestral lands we gather on. We acknowledge the deep feelings of attachment and relationship of the Kaurna people to country, and we respect and value their past, present and ongoing connection to the land and cultural beliefs.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Voices in Action podcast with Create Foundation SA team. This podcast is called Voices in Action, Journey in Care.
We are excited to be releasing our first podcast series. We have episodes lined up to appeal to the out-of-home care sector, fostering change and advocating for a better future for young people in care. We hope this podcast is helpful for children and young people in the care system and inspires you that you are a valuable human being.
We acknowledge that the topics discussed can be potentially triggering, so we encourage you to take care of yourself. We've listed some support services in the show notes. This episode does discuss physical abuse in the first few minutes. Make sure you're in a good headspace to listen, or else you can skip forward to about the 5:30 minute mark. Hi everyone, how you going? I have Fabian here with me, and we have Tamara, who is a previous young consultant with Create. Hi Tamara.
Hello.
Hi Tamara, welcome back. Obviously we go back a long way, so Indeed. It's lovely to see you again.
Yes, when we just talked about the podcast, Fabian's like, well, we need to get Tamara on this podcast. I'm like, yes, I'm super excited to hear your journey and your story. So let's jump into it. Tamara, do you want to introduce yourself, a little bit about the placement you were in growing up and what you're currently doing?
Okay, so my name's Tamara. In foster care, I was in both foster care and emergency care, mixture of both throughout my time. So I was in care from the age of 11 through to obviously ageing out at the age of 18. I guess my foster care experience, my mother died when I was 6, Dad remarried, and my stepmother was, like the stereotypical stepmother from hell sort of thing. So we were living with them for about 4 years, and at that point, throughout that period, she was quite physically and emotionally abusive as well. And so in 2004, I feel so old saying that, but in 2004, after numerous reports through to what was then, I think they were calling them phase, phase or KIFs or...
FSA? No.
I think it was phase, Families and Youth.
Okay.
Like that. Yeah. So really showing my age.
Yeah.
Anyway, so with lots of reports through to the system, we were finally taken out of there.
Okay.
And were put under a 12-month order to begin with. That it got extended for another 12 months, and then from there we got put under the guardianship until the age of 18. So I stayed with a foster carer for the first 3 months. So I've got 5, there's 5 of us siblings.
Yeah, I was going to ask how many of you there were.
Yeah, so 5 of us in total, so big family. So when we were first put in foster care, the 2 younger boys were put together. The 2 older girls were put together, and I was by myself for a period of about 2 or 3 months. And then after 2 or 3 months, my sister's carer said, we can chuck a bunk bed.
Okay.
And we can get Tamara in, so that way the girls are together and the boys are together. Turned out that carer was physically abusive, and so in 2006, me and my older sister were put into emergency care just because obviously they decided, it's not a great situation.
It's not safe. Yeah,
and so we got put into an apartment in the city. So we're talking about November 2006, and we stayed there until April 2007.
Wow.
So 2007 was when I started high school. So we were catching a bus from the middle of the city out to Modbury each day, so that I could go to high school. Same school as my sister. And then they were making efforts into finding a proper placement for us, so they came out and did some interviews, find out what we liked, what we didn't like, that sort of thing, and tried to pair us up with a carer, which I think at the time they were trialling to see if it worked. And then we got put with a foster carer who I stayed with until I was 18. So really good stability throughout high school.
Yeah.
It was quite cold. It was come home, yep, okay, go upstairs in your bedroom, come down for dinner, okay, go do your own thing now. Like there wasn't a lot of emotional
And connection, sounds like.
But it did provide that stability that like I know a lot of young people in care don't get. So like I was
but
grateful
also
for that.
hearing emotional support is obviously huge.
Yeah.
Huge if you're in that kind of situation.
Yeah. But I think that's also where like I was able to maintain a good relationship with my siblings and my father's mum, so my nana.
Yeah.
And I think that provided that emotional support growing up as well. So yeah, that was my history in foster care. It certainly is a lot better than some kids with their experience in care. Yes, there was a bit of abuse earlier on, but that stability throughout high school has really helped me with what I'm doing now.
Yeah. And what are you doing now?
I'm a registered nurse.
Wow.
I work in an area called anaesthetics recovery. So we sometimes...
The fun part, the funny stuff when they come out of being under.
Yeah.
So essentially, you know, both children or paediatrics, as well as obstetrics, so people giving birth. So they come in, you know, for whatever reason, have a C-section or any sort of gynae sort of procedure. And then all the paediatrics, anything you can think of, we basically do at the hospital. So that involves shift work. So night shift, I start night shift on Thursday night, so I'm not looking forward to that. But it also allows me, you know, days off during the week as well. If I'm working on the weekend, then I frequently get days off during the week. So it just adds a bit of flexibility.
Not to mention your cadets as well.
Yes.
If that's okay to mention.
So I'm part of Army Cadets, and I have been for about 8.5 years now.
Amazing.
I love that.
And 8.5 years later, I've been in a number of different roles, but I'm now currently what they call a battalion commander. So South Australia split into 4 battalions. So I'm in charge of about 25 adults and about 200 cadets.
Wow.
So it keeps me pretty busy.
It would.
That's what I'm planning to do once I finish here today. Go in and spend a number of hours there. But
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Tamara, how did Create help you as a young person in care?
Initially, I remember when we entered care, we got given a brochure about Curé, and I'm like, oh, okay, whatever that is. But a few years later, I specifically remember sitting in the lounge room, and my social worker had organised for someone to come out to have a chat to us about a potential camping trip, because at the time I loved going on camping trips. And I'm like, okay, cool, seems good. And, her name was Emily. She came from Create. She was like, oh, we've got this program called Mission B, which is, 4 or 5 weekends, a couple of camping trips, all about just supporting young people as they, start to get a bit older in the system and start thinking about transitioning and things like that. And I'm like, I don't really care about anything else. I want the camp. I want to go on these camping trips. And after the first weekend, I'm like, actually, no, this seems pretty cool. And they were starting to talk about things like the Duke of Edinburgh Award that was being run at the time. Which meant you had to do 4 different things.
That's right. Jeez, that's all coming back to me now. Wow.
And so, I signed up to do the Duke of Ed Award, and that seemed pretty cool. It was a bronze award, and progressed through to gold. And so by the end of the Mission B program, I was hooked. I was in Create.
You're in Create, we've got you.
And then I think the following year they did what they call ENYAC, so the National Youth Advisory Council. So it ran for 3 or 4 years, and I think I was in the second year that it was running, where we all went to Sydney. So there's about 2 or 3 reps from each state that went to Sydney for the period of 3 or 4 days, and we basically provided our voice and said, this is what's happening for young people in care at the moment. And then came up a bit of an action plan, and there was a bit of a dinner and whatnot. And so there was about 20 of us, and I still got a number of these guys on Facebook. Not that I really talk to them much anymore, because it was over 10 years ago. But it was good to see what other young people were doing around the country. And there were some really common themes across the country with the issues that were being faced. So I did a couple of the ENYACs, going to Sydney, and then that's when it then progressed into the national conference. I don't know what you guys call it, but the first one was in Canberra, and then I think And then
Still before my time, I think.
yeah. But I think you guys still do it every couple of years.
The CREATE conference.
yeah.
Yes,
Create
you were part of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So ENIAC evolved into the Create conference.
Okay.
Where obviously a lot more young people got to go, and there was a more seminar-based thing as opposed to just a small group of us going there.
Yeah.
And so I was involved with the first couple of Create conferences as well.
Oh, amazing.
Which was good. But what I really enjoyed about the ENIACs was like you felt as though you really had a voice.
Yeah.
Here's what I've experienced. Here's what we've all experienced.
Yeah.
Okay, let's come up with an action plan as to how to improve this.
Yeah.
Things like transitioning from care kits came from those ENIAC conferences.
Oh, wow. I'm learning stuff today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I was actually going through my wardrobe, and I've still got my first ENIAC t-shirt.
Oh, wow.
It's small, so I couldn't wear it.
Yeah.
But, you know, it was just being involved in those sorts of programs, which was really beneficial because it enticed me to keep coming back. As a result of Mission B and Create, going off and doing Duke of Edinburgh Award, and realising that I want to be a nurse.
Yeah.
So that whole correlation there is directly related to my time in Create.
Yeah, amazing. That actually twines into the next question. Can you share some of your highlights of engaging with Create? Was there a highlight or something you can remember from going to the events we ran or programs?
I do remember my first ENIAC. It was the first time I ever got to be on a plane.
Oh, wow. Yes.
So that's still quite a strong memory there. But I think just, you know, being involved in camping trips at the time, and then as I started to get a bit older, get into tertiary education, get into the workforce, I was coming back as a young person before I got too old. And then just starting to help mentor the younger people coming through the organisation. And I guess, you know, that leadership and that mentorship is probably the reason why I'm doing quite well in Army cadets, but also my workplace too.
Yeah, those skills carry on.
I was telling a colleague about my care experience only a couple of weeks ago, and they went, "Oh my God, I didn't realise that," you know, one thing they said, it still irritates me to this day, is you seemed so normal. And it still continues, you know. I'm 30 now, I've become well established in my career, and people are still saying that.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh my God, it's just, I don't know what we can do to change that. And then, you know, in my workplace, you know, I do come across kids that are in care. I remember I was in recovery later one night, and this child was still waking up, and normally we don't bring parents or caregivers in, but this was one child that needed someone. You know, I saw on the paperwork that, you know, this child was in care, and so I was able to talk to the carers a little bit. And I don't straight away say, oh yeah, I was a foster kid myself. But I just got the conversation flowing, and she was like, you seem to know a lot about this, you know, were you a social worker or whatever? I'm like, oh no, I was a kid in care. And so she started asking me lots of questions, and by the end of it she was in tears. And I'm like, oh, are you okay? And she's like, no, it's just so great. It's such a success story coming out of the care system, because she's obviously deep in the trenches at the moment, you know, dealing with a variety of different issues. And so, like, I was walking the child back to the ward, and we just kept chatting, and she ended up giving me a massive hug at the end of it.
Nice is that?
I was between high school and uni. I worked at a campsite for a year. I did a traineeship, so that way I can get myself set up for uni the following year. And I was about 2 weeks in, and the person that was the head cook of the kitchen pulled me inside, and she said, my husband's really interested about your story and whatnot. I didn't tell my story at that point in time. She knew that I was in care, and it turns out that he was too, back in the 60s.
Yeah.
And he picked it within about 2 minutes of talking to me. He was like, she was in care, wasn't she? And, you know, everyone was like, yeah, she was. How'd you pick it? And the thing that he said was, I can't tell you. I just know and
feel it.
And I see that now when I'm talking to these young people, not necessarily at work again, because you know they're waking up from anesthesia. But definitely cadets, 100%. I can pick them.
Interesting.
Yeah. So.
What were some of the common issues young people were experiencing during your time in care? What were you hearing from other young people you were experiencing?
I think certainly the stigma side of things. I know at the time they had started to create a campaign called Stamp That Stigma.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's still
Yeah, we're still doing that. Yeah.
But I was there when they first started rolling that out.
Yeah.
And the stigma aspect of it was huge.
Yeah.
Especially when you're in a room full of other young people that had no care experience. I do remember I went to my foster family's Christmas get-together or something. There's heaps of us kids around. And they were like, oh, who do you belong to? And I'm like, oh, Becky and Gary over here. And they went, oh, you're one of those kids. Oh. So, the stigma aspect of it was so huge. And still experiencing it now, as I was saying, with my workplace. But I guess, another thing that I was reflecting on the drive here was, social workers, how frequently they go in and out. And again, working in a sector now full of young people, I understand, worker burnout, all that sort of stuff. People do move on. But I remember at the time, I was probably 15 and I wanted to get in contact with my social worker for whatever reason. And she'd only been in for a couple of months, so I hadn't even met her, but I'd called over the phone a couple of times. And I called up the office and I said, oh, can I speak to such and such? And they went, oh, she's no longer here. And I'm like, okay, so who's my social worker? And they went, oh, we'll have a look. And got back to me about 10 minutes later and they said, oh, it's this person. And I'm like, great, I've had no communication. Yeah. Spoke to my foster carer. Yeah, they didn't know either. So, workers just coming in and out. And in some situations, no communication whatsoever. And I remember probably in the last 9 months of my time in care, the social worker at the time had to move on for whatever reason. And they went, look, let's just give you the person that was your worker a number of years ago for 2 or 3 years. Yeah. She's a senior prac now, but you're such an easy person, so we'll just we'll just put you in her care.
In the easy basket.
So I was always put into the easy young person aspect, which made it hard because then they wouldn't reach out as much, they wouldn't communicate, they wouldn't tell me that workers are changing because it's like, oh, she never contacts. She only wants us when she wants to go on a camp and gets a form signed, sort of thing. Yeah. So I think that aspect of the workers constantly changing, being classified as an easy kid, therefore not needing as much support, and it's like,
no, I still need support. I'm going through crucial times of my life.
Yeah,
it's when I need you guys.
The flow-on effect of workers coming in and out, not even communicating, is things like the young person learns to, no, I'm not going to open up.
Yeah,
because they're just going to leave in 2 minutes' time, or whatever it's going to be, and then the flow-on effect of that is potentially, not having suitable relationships later in their life, and like I'm seeing that now with people that I know that have had care experience and. They can't form those proper relationships with people.
Yeah, trust and
because they've learned that they're just
people
come and go. They're not going to
and
open up, and like even I sometimes have difficulties with opening up to people, and I've had a couple of failed relationships, and they're just like, you're like a brick wall, and I'm like, oh, I'm trying to.
Yeah, my experience has really impacted on me on those healthy relationships.
Yeah, absolutely.
What advice would you give a young person who is in care or has been there around the care system?
Big thing for me is maintain connection to community. And what I mean by that is, if you're a current young person, get involved with youth groups, get involved with, we call them service youth organisations, Army Cadets, St John Cadets, CFS cadets, whatever. The connection to the community, it didn't matter which placement I was in, didn't matter about social workers coming in and out. The stability of knowing that I had cadets every Tuesday night was huge, was absolutely huge. So youth organisations are maintaining that connection to community because it doesn't matter where you move to. Yeah. Having that connection means that it's that stability that you don't necessarily get if you keep moving from house to house.
Yeah, such great advice for young people. So powerful.
Yeah, that's great.
What would be some tips, Tamara, you would give to some professionals or workers in this field that would help them engaging with young people with a care experience?
don't call them DCP kids or GOM kids. I see that at work. The amount of times that I've said, no, they're not a GOM kid.
Yeah.
They're a child.
Yeah.
Or they're
Well
a teenager.
done.
And they went, oh, I'm just saying what it is. And I'm like, no, you don't realise the impact.
Yeah.
Especially if that kid overhears what you're saying.
Yeah.
Like, it still affects me now, and I've been out for 12 years from the system. So using abbreviations is so not appropriate. It's easy, and I get it. In my workplace, it's easy to say, oh, it's that kid in Theatre 4. It's like, no, they've got a name. They're not just the kid that's having an appendix out.
Yeah.
It's, they're
a human being.
That's a really good practice, Tamara. That's lovely. That's nice. Hopefully a lot of other practitioners will learn off you and the way you engage with young people that way. So that's really lovely.
I think also talking with young people, they're not kids. They are young people. And we see it in cadets, we don't call them kids, we call them cadets, that is what they are in the organisation. They're not kids, they're not the little 5-year-olds running around playing army, they are cadets. So making sure that you're addressing them appropriately, that they understand that you respect, who they are and what they are. And understanding, obviously everyone has a different story, so finding out, if you're taking on the care of a young person, find out what makes them tick. What is it that makes them tick, and what can they do to help ease that relationship building that needs to happen?
Yeah.
So,
love this. Thank you so much, Tamara, for your time today with this podcast and coming. I learnt so much, and listening to your story, I feel very special being here and appreciate it so much.
Thanks for listening to the episode of the Voices in Action Journey in Care podcast. Remember, we have support services listed in the show notes. If you liked this episode, spread the word and leave us a review. Thank you.